The grand study of the Williams estate was wrapped in golden silence. The late evening sun streamed through tall windows, casting warm slants of light across the polished bookshelves and mahogany walls. Jason Williams sat in a high-back leather chair, a crystal glass of bourbon resting untouched on the side table. His eyes stared blankly at the roaring fireplace, the flames dancing in a rhythm he wasn't paying attention to. His thoughts were elsewhere. The empire. The billion-naira legacy his father had built from dust. The countless industries, offshore investments, the controlling shares in companies across the continent. And all of it now rested on his shoulders. Was he ready? Was this what he truly wanted? He had spent 10 years in Canada, far from the suffocating expectations, the cold strategies, the endless manipulation, but now back in Nigeria, under his father's towering shadow again. He wasn't so sure. He exhaled deeply and ran a hand through his curls, his mind heavy, his heart even heavier. And then, like a breeze slipping into a locked room, Aisha entered. She wasn't in uniform anymore. She hadn't worn it in days. Instead, she floated into the study wearing a soft, flowy blouse the color of sunrise and a pair of fitted jeans that made her walk look like poetry. She didn't knock. She never did. She leaned on the doorframe, arms folded, lips curved into that teasing smile she wore like armor. "Your face is doing that brooding thing again." Jason turned his head slightly but didn't smile. "Maybe I have a lot to brood about." "Let me guess," she said, sauntering into the room, her heels clicking softly against the marble floor. "The family empire? The looming throne? The terrifying prospect of turning into your father?" Jason let out a dry chuckle. She always got under his skin, not in a bad way, but in a way that made him feel seen. Something like that. She perched on the edge of his desk, her long fingers toying with the edge of his notebook. "You know," she said slowly, tilting her head. "For a man who doesn't believe in distractions, you sure let me hang around a lot." Jason raised an eyebrow. "Are you calling yourself a distraction?" "A beautiful one," she replied shamelessly, her eyes glinting. There was a pause. And then she asked softly this time, as if it slipped out before she could stop herself. "Do you find me interesting, Jason?" Jason's eyes flicked up to meet hers. There was no teasing in his expression, just something unreadable. Too interesting. The silence that followed stretched long and taut between them. And then, without another word, he stood and left the study, leaving Aisha sitting there, smiling like someone who had just won the first round of a dangerous game. In the quiet of her room, Aisha sat on her bed, hugging one of the estate's expensive silk pillows to her chest. The chandelier above cast a soft glow over her face, highlighting the distant, dreamlike look in her eyes. She was supposed to be focused. She was supposed to be strategic. But damn it, she was falling. No, she had already fallen. Her fingers brushed the edges of her journal as she whispered into the night, "This was never meant to be real." She was sent here with a mission, a goal. Get close to Jason Williams, make him fall, make him marry her, secure the future. It was a plan that made sense, on paper. But now, she couldn't stop thinking about the way he looked at her when he thought she wasn't watching, or how he always acted like he didn't care, but still remembered how she liked her tea, or the way he never let her walk too close to the edge of the garden stairs. These weren't acts. These were moments. Moments that made her want the fantasy to be real. Her hand slipped across her stomach gently. She smiled to herself. "I can't wait till he asks." Not as part of the plan, but because he meant it. The next morning, the door to Chief Benjamin Williams' private office opened with a slow creak. Aisha stepped in confidently, dressed in an elegant black wrap dress, her natural curls pinned up, her heels silent against the polished floor. Chief Williams looked up from behind his desk, his expression unreadable, eyes sharp and cold like always. He didn't offer her a seat. He never did. But she sat anyway, crossed her legs, placed her clutch delicately on her lap, and smiled like she had been doing this all her life. "Speak." Aisha leaned forward slightly, her voice low, controlled and assured. "Your son is opening up." Benjamin's fingers paused over a document. "Meaning?" "He trusts me." A beat. "Has he confessed anything?" "Not yet, but he's talking, laughing, letting me in. Benjamin folded his arms, watching her with suspicion. You know what I want, Aisha. Not just emotion, I want marriage. He must choose you. Aisha smiled then, the kind of smile that didn't falter under pressure, the kind of smile that promised chaos dressed as charm. She stood slowly, smoothing her dress down, and as she reached for the door, she looked over her shoulder and said, Give it time, Chief Williams. I know how to make a man fall. Trust me. The sun filtered through the glass ceiling of the luxury mall, casting soft light over marble floors and gleaming storefronts. It was a Saturday afternoon, and the city's elite moved like they owned the place. Designer bags on arms, diamond watches catching light with every movement. Jason Williams didn't particularly like malls. Too much noise, too many strangers, too many options. But Aisha had been in his ear all morning about needing a mental refresh and subtly mocking his boring wardrobe until he finally gave in. Now he walked beside her, sleeves rolled, hands in his pockets, and a reluctant smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. You know, she said, skipping a step ahead of him as they passed a store window, you might actually be fun when you let yourself breathe. Is that what this is? Breathing? He asked dryly. She twirled slightly. Yes, Jason. Breathing, living, shopping, being less intense for once. He shook his head, but truthfully, he didn't mind. She had that effect, making the heavy things feel a little lighter. They stepped into one of the high-end stores. While Aisha sifted through shirts he'd never wear, Jason's gaze caught something, or someone. She was across the aisle, a tall, striking woman, dressed in a wine-colored jumpsuit, her natural curls piled neatly atop her head. Elegant, confident. She moved with quiet grace, examining a necklace behind the glass counter. Jason stilled. It wasn't the first time he'd seen her. In fact, he was sure this was the third time. Once in the parking lot, another time at a bookstore near this mall. Never a word exchanged, just familiarity without context. Jason, Aisha's voice pulled him back. She was watching him carefully. Do you know her? She asked. Jason blinked. Number not at all. But you've seen her before. He nodded slightly. Twice, I think. She's probably just a regular here. Aisha didn't ask anything else. She simply handed him a shirt. Try this. Maybe she'll look at you again. Jason narrowed his eyes, unamused. She winked. He changed the subject. Later, after a quiet meal in a corner cafe tucked on the upper floor of the mall, they sat sipping mocktails and watching shoppers move like waves below them. Jason leaned back, arms folded, eyes still distant. Aisha tilted her head. So, tell me, what's your type? Jason looked over at her, surprised. What? Women? Love? Relationships? What's your type? She asked again, this time more serious. He chuckled softly, brushing his fingers across the cold glass in front of him. I don't think I have a type. That's a lie, she said casually, sipping her drink. Jason raised a brow. How would you know? Because everyone has a type. Even when they swear they don't. It's usually the one person they can't stop thinking about but won't admit they like. Jason stared at her for a moment. Okay, fine. He leaned forward, elbows on the table. I like women who are real, who speak their mind, who don't pretend to be something they're not. Aisha blinked. So, me? She asked with a small smirk. Jason hesitated. Maybe. He said it so low, it almost got lost beneath the soft hum of music around them. Aisha smiled, but this time, not playfully. It was soft, hopeful. She leaned in. You know, sometimes love isn't a whirlwind or a grand speech. Sometimes it's just two people having lunch and forgetting the rest of the world. Jason studied her face. He didn't know what to say to that. You believe in love? He asked quietly. She nodded without hesitation. I do, because I've seen what it does to people. It changes them, makes them gentler, braver. Jason exhaled slowly, eyes dropping to the space between their hands on the table. And what about you? He asked. What's your type? Aisha smiled. Someone who doesn't realize they've already started falling. Jason looked up at her, their eyes locking. Neither of them said another word, but they both felt it. The shift, the quiet spark becoming a flame. And for the first time, Jason didn't want to run from it. Aisha had always known how to keep people on their toes. Playful, charming, always in control. She could flirt without effort and walk away before anyone realized they were falling. But with Jason, something was changing. She found herself waiting for his footsteps, smiling too much at his sarcasm, and holding her breath for the sound of his laugh. That night, under the soft glow of garden lanterns and a sky full of quiet stars, she sat near the pool, knees pulled to her chest, watching him move through the water like he belonged in it. His strokes were smooth, unhurried. There was something oddly peaceful about seeing him like that, unguarded. Jason reached the shallow end and pushed his wet curls out of his face, resting his arms on the edge. Water dripped from his shoulders, glinting under the light. He seemed lost in thought, his jaw tight, gaze fixed on the ripples in front of him. Aisha nudged a nearby flip-flop with her toe and murmured, "If I didn't know better, I'd say you're actually capable of deep thoughts." Jason glanced at her with a half smirk. "If I didn't know better, I'd say you missed me while I was underwater." She rolled her eyes. "Please, I just figured you were meditating or plotting to fire me." He let out a soft laugh, but it didn't reach his eyes. Aisha tilted her head, suddenly quieter. "You're tense, regretting letting me stick around?" Jason swam closer to her side of the pool and rested his arms on the ledge again, the smirk returning, this time slower, softer. "Not even a little. Actually, I think I like it. Maybe too much." Aisha's breath caught for a second. She masked it with a light chuckle. "Careful, Jason. Falling for me would be a terrible idea." He raised an eyebrow, amusement dancing in his eyes. "And why's that?" "Because," she said with a fake sigh, standing up and brushing imaginary dust off her shorts, "I'm an emotional hurricane. I ruin hearts and sleep schedules." Jason leaned back, floating lazily in the water now, eyes locked on her. "So what you're saying is, I should have stayed single." "Exactly," she grinned. He floated in silence for a moment, then said almost too calmly, "Funny, I thought you were the one trying to make me fall." Her smile faltered for a second. Was he serious? Does he know? She covered it with a laugh, kicking a splash of water toward him. "Who says I'm trying? This charm works on autopilot." Jason swam to the edge again, pulling himself out of the pool slowly, water dripping off him like something out of a dream. He sat beside her on the edge, elbows resting on his knees. "You know," he said after a beat, "you pretend you're made of stone, but I don't buy it." "Maybe don't try to read me like a book," she muttered, suddenly uncomfortable under his gaze. He reached up, brushing a damp curl away from her cheek, his touch warm despite the cool air. Too late. Her skin tingled where his fingers lingered. She wanted to move. She didn't, because for the first time, she wasn't sure if this was just a performance or the beginning of something she wasn't ready for. Later that night, Aisha curled on the couch, pretending to read a book she hadn't turned the page on in 20 minutes. Her mind was still stuck by the pool, on his touch, his words, the look in his eyes. Then Jason walked in, damp hair, fresh shirt clinging to his chest, calm like nothing had shifted. She cleared her throat. "Would it kill you to look slightly less good all the time? Some of us are trying to concentrate." Jason chuckled. "Didn't realize I was that distracting." "You're not." She said it too quickly. He grinned and took the seat beside her, sitting close, closer than usual. Their knees touched. The air between them thickened. "Ever think about what love's actually supposed to feel like?" he asked, eyes on the ceiling. She blinked. "Is that a trick question?" "No," he said, voice low. "Just wondering." She leaned back slowly. "Love is messy, loud, annoying, makes people ruin everything for a feeling." He turned to look at her, his voice calm. "You ever really been in it?" She was about to answer with some witty line, but the truth caught in her throat, and that silence said enough. Jason's voice softened. "I think I might be falling for you, Aisha." Her heart skipped. Her fingers trembled slightly on the book cover. This wasn't part of the plan, and yet this was everything she'd started to want. She glanced at him, trying to speak, but he was already watching her like he saw past every version of her she'd ever pretended to be. Then he reached for her hand. She didn't pull away. Not this time. Because maybe, just maybe, she wasn't pretending anymore. The stars blanketed the night sky, scattered across it like secrets waiting to be whispered. The rooftop terrace of the Williams estate was quiet, save for the soft hum of the wind and the steady beat of music coming from Jason's Bluetooth speaker. Jason leaned back on the large daybed, a glass in his hand, his other arm resting behind Aisha, who curled into his side. Her legs stretched out lazily as she let her head fall to his shoulder, completely wrapped in the comfort of his presence. He looked over at her, eyes catching the curve of her smile. "You look at peace tonight," he murmured. She glanced up at him. "You make it easy to forget the world exists." His mouth twitched into a soft smile. "That might be the most romantic thing you've ever said," she chuckled. "Don't get used to it." It had been a month since the night everything changed. A night Aisha would never forget. The night when her hands met Jason's in the dark, when whispered jokes turned into breathless kisses and teasing turned into something real. They hadn't planned it, but once it happened, there was no going back. Since then, everything between them had changed, quietly, naturally. Jason had become softer with her, attentive, protective even. He'd started waiting up for her after long days, brushing his fingers over hers during dinner, holding her hand a little too long before letting go. And Aisha, she had fallen, so hard it scared her, because every moment she spent in his arms reminded her of what she had come here to do, of the lie she was still living. And now, something else had begun to haunt her. It started with small things. Food she normally craved suddenly made her stomach turn. Fatigue hit her like waves, even when she'd done nothing all day. A faint nausea in the morning that she brushed off as stress. She hadn't taken a test. She hadn't dared. But in her heart, something told her she might be carrying his child. Aisha sat curled in Jason's shirt, her knees tucked to her chest on the window seat of his room. The estate was quiet. He had stepped out for a business meeting. She pressed a hand against her stomach, a strange tightness twisting inside her. She hadn't bled in weeks. Her body felt different. She stared out the window, lips trembling. "What if I am?" she whispered to herself. "What if it's already too late to walk away?" Her phone buzzed. A message from Jason. "Jason, I'll be back in an hour. Missed you already." She swallowed hard. Her heart shattered just reading it. Because what he didn't know was that the woman he'd fallen for might have never walked into his life if not for money, manipulation, and a promise to someone who didn't deserve to be obeyed. And now, she was tangled in something real, something she never meant to find. A love, a man, and maybe a child. She stood slowly, her reflection catching in the mirror. Eyes tired, body different, heart broken. "If he ever finds out," she whispered to herself, voice cracking, "will he ever look at me with love again?" Watch out for part 3, the final part. The truth is on the edge of breaking, and love may not be enough to save them. Will Jason still choose her when he discovers everything began with a lie? Don't miss it. Subscribe now so you don't miss the moment everything changes.